So welcome to this tutorial on the fundamentals of DesignWorks software. In order to open the program, my program's here on the taskbar, and it looks like this little flower here. Interesting enough, you don't want to confuse that little flower. If you have palette software, look how similar it looks. It's a little blue flower, so we want the little silver flower. You could also find your Bernina DesignWorks software if you go over to your programs, and if you go down to Bernina, you're going to see DesignWorks here. And so under this location, also take note that it shows you where your sample folders are and also where the manual for the software is. You can also, of course, find the manual in the program itself, which we're going to look at. This section here, this US key upgrade, this is really only applicable if you did not purchase the DesignWorks suite. And the suite consists of 3 tools: cut work, paint work, and crystal work. When this software originally came out, it was only cut work. That was the initial offering from Bernina, and then subsequent to that, we now have paint work and crystal work. And for those of you that might have just the cut work or another one of the modules, you would go to Steve's Sew and Vac in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, and you would purchase the key code for crystal work or paint work, and then those modules will be added to your software. So as we work here, if you find that you're not seeing some icons that we're seeing here in class with the video, it might be that you only have one of the modules and not the suite, but you can certainly complete the suite when you're ready. So I'm going to come down to the taskbar here, and I'm going to click on these icon here, which will open up the software. If you like to have your software being opened via the taskbar, what you would do is you would come down to the taskbar. Let me get that up here. And if you right-click on the icon, you would have Pin to Taskbar if you had not already done this. I have the option to unpin it, but I want to keep it in the taskbar. So any program that you have open and you are running is in the taskbar. And we can, of course, right-click on the icon and then say Pin to Taskbar, and it just makes the finding of the program a little more convenient. So the first thing that's going to happen is when you open up your software, you're going to see, I'm going to call this a wizard, and the wizard's going to talk you through various and sundry menu items to kind of get you where you need to be as far as the what you're creating: paint, cut, and crystal, of course. Do take note that when you're looking at the software, the initial folder, or the initial, file format type for this program is a .draw file, .draw. And that's important to keep in mind. Like if you were working in, say, Bernina's embroidery software, your native format file would be an art90 or an art90. That's in their current version, which is version 9. In DesignWorks, it's a .draw. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and I'm just going to go ahead and say open an existing, so we can just get something here. And boy, why don't we start with feet? That sounds intriguing. Notice that it shows me the location of this. This is, I will tell you, are where your designs that are built into the software are stored. So notice the path that we have here is, in essence, the C users public documents Bernina DesignWorks samples. That's where you're going to see these types of files. So I'm going to go ahead and just click finish, and this is just going to bring this design up so that we can see the whole interface in all of its glory. And true enough, these look to me like crystal footprints. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to start at the very top of the software, which is up here. And this looks pretty much like any software you're going to see, not necessarily DesignWorks, but if you were, say, in palette software from BabyLock or DesignWorks from Bernina, you would see things like File, Edit, View, Tools, Windows, and Help. And whatever is in here, like this, say, this file thing, if you notice that when I click on this, I have not only things to select, like creating a new file, opening an existing one, but do you see these icons here to the left? These icons are in your toolbars, these things that are up here. So these toolbars, in essence, are shortcuts, these icons, to what's already up in this area here. So whatever you see down to the, let me just click off of that, whatever you see like to the left of this here, or to the right of this up here, up top here, most of these functions, if not all of them, can be found up here. This is just a quick way to get to those functions. So I also want to point your attention to the fact that we also have things like shortcuts, keyboard shortcuts, such as Control-N to create a new document, Control-O to open up a new one. So even without being in the software, I can type in, I'm going to type in Control and N, and you can see that this has created a new folder, and it's bringing me open this wizard again. And we're going to get to that in just a bit. But every time I create something new, it will populate here. And let me just go ahead and do Control, and once again, I'm just going to go through this wizard so that that tab will stay open. I'm just going to click Next, and I'm going to say a new graphic. We'll talk about this further. So I have two tabs here. I have an untitled, because it's not named anything, and I have something called Bernina 001 Feet Draw, which again was originally part of this design collection or program. When I click on this, one thing that I would suggest that you do is, if you make any modifications for this and you don't want to overwrite the original folder, because this was what was in your software when it was installed, rather than come up here and say File, Save, you're going to want to say File, Save As. Because what that's going to allow me to do when I open up File, Save As, I get two fields that I'm to fill out. One is rename this. Rename this like My Feet, or Bernina 0. I wouldn't put 002 because you can see that's already a name of something here. But name it something that's significant to you. Notice that it is a draw file. And if I come down here, notice that I am able to save this as other file format types, such as the Bernina EXP, or say the Brother, or BabyLock for that matter, PES. Saving it as this type of file format would not make much sense, because these embroidery machines don't know crystal from atom. It would make more sense to just save it as the draw file in this particular case, because it's crystal work. Let me just cancel out of that. But I wanted you to just take note that if you do bring in, again, designs that are built into the software, get in the habit of right off the bat naming it something else. And so for this, I'm just going to type this as, I'm going to call this Class Trial. And I don't want to save it in the location of where my samples are. Let me just save it into a folder I have on my desktop that's called Embroidery Hold. And this is something really good to be in a habit of. I created this folder on my desktop because desktops are easy to find in the File Explorer. So if I click on Desktop, not just saving it to the desktop, because in your desktop is going to be populated with a bunch of feet, but go into your Embroidery Hold, and then I have under here a lot of different categories that I have used. And let me just I'm going to right click and create a new folder here. And we're going to call this, let's just call this DesignWorks Fundamentals. And so if during the program we want to save other things, we can certainly do that, and then it'll be in one location. So I've got class trial. The location is in embroidery hold. DesignWorks Fundamental is the folder. It's being saved as a draw file, and I'm going to go ahead and click Save. And if you notice, as I come up here, this tab, which used to be called Bernina 001 feet, something along that, is now called Class Trial. And I like that because now that has saved my, my design that was originally created. So we're back in the software, and as you can see, there is a blank screen that you can all enjoy for a few moments. What we're going to do is, if you first boot up the software, you saw that that wizard came up, and all I did off camera is I just closed the design that had the crystal foot in them. I guess feet, 2 of them. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to create a new design, and in order to do that, I'm going to come up here to where it has the new icon. Notice that the shortcut for that is Control-N, and when I click on that, I'm greeted by this wizard. Now, this first part of the wizard, look what it talks about. It talks about fabric containing crucial information about how to embroider on it. If your fabric does not exist, select one of the closest for elasticity. So what they're talking about here really is embroidery. And although we can do a running stitch and we can do like satin, etc., this software is not embroidery software. This is software to design cutting lines, crystal lines, and painted lines. And we can do fill objects that include crystal fill and painted fill. And that is the long and short of the software. So there's another software that the same manufacturer makes. One of them is Artistic Designer that Bernina, that Janome sells. And that is this interface, but it has more tools. And in that software, you can create step pattern fills and things of that nature. So this kind of makes more sense for that, as far as this is controlling how much compensation that you have down on there, the density of the fills, etc., for embroidery. So with this, I generally will not, I'll just kind of go forward with this as opposed to selecting denim, for instance. It doesn't really make that much sense with cut work and crystal and paint. One utility for that is you can see there are some predefined colors. Like if I click here, ooh, that's harsh, that's even harsher. What I can do is if I right click on this, let me see, if I double click on it, it's a double click. I'm greeted by this window where I can, let me just kind of move this to the side. Do you see how these colors are the same as these colors, and these colors are the same as these? So I can take any of these colors. Let's just say this really dark one here in the bottom right, which I'm generally not going to have that as my background. And I can make a new one-click backdrop color out of this. And how I would do that is, if I take this, this is selected, you can see there's a little box around it. I can take this little cursor and move this around. You can see that this is updating the color here. So you can see if I get into the yellowish colors, and if I increase this, you can see how this is showing me what I'm doing here. So this is one way you could change that color. And then if I clicked on Add to Custom Color, you see how this has been updated. And so I have, changed some of the colors so that I can see things a little bit easier, per se. But that's how you're going to change this background color. I'm going to go ahead and click on Next. And what I'm looking at now is what kind of graphic, what kind of image am I going to be working with. And so one of the things that you can do is you can work from a specific file. And so This generally goes to the last place that you had been in the software. Take note of this file path, C users public documents, Bernina DesignWorks samples. That's a good place to kind of remember and take note of. If I click on these little 3 dots here, this is opening up that particular location. And if I say I want to see medium size formats files, I can now see icons. And if I'm in, say, DesignWorks, there's nothing in that particular folder. Let me just see here into training. So you'll see these kind of images that you can work with, and these are indeed images per se that we're bringing up. CMX is a CorelDRAW extension per se. So if I wanted to, let me just go ahead and just click on this JPEG file, and you can see it gives me the height and the width of it, and it gives me a preview of what we're looking at. And if I click on open, that is what will open when I click on next. I can also work with embroidery, and so with this, if I click here, again, this is users public documents, Bernina DesignWorks samples, but now this is looking at embroidery files, not image files. So when I come over here, let me just kind of make this window just a tad bigger. What I'm dealing with are different embroidery files. Now notice that the extension on these files is .ngs, and you can see that here as well, .ngs. That actually stands for Wings, W-I-N-G-S, and this is the native embroidery format for that software that I was telling you about, that Janome Artistic Designer software. But notice that it can also bring in things like Bernina EXP designs. It can bring in Baby Lock Pez designs, Viking VP3 designs, Janome JEF. Most of the major players here in embroidery, it can bring in those designs. And the lovely thing about bringing in an embroidery design is you can take part of the component, let's just say these leaves, and you can remove the stitches and put, say, a paint fill in there, and we'll look at that. But you can work with embroidery designs. The thing is, you can't put in a different fill, and you can't modify the stitches and all, because again, this is not embroidery software. Let me just go ahead and cancel out of that. You can also get artwork from a scanned image, and we don't use scanners a whole lot these days. I oftentimes will take things, pictures with my cell phone and bring those across. You can also do it via a webcam, and the webcam for those computers that are capable of it, that's the camera that's built into your, say, notebook computer, and you can certainly use that. And new from Graphic, which is going to be where we're going to be starting with this, is where you just open up a blank page, and in essence you're going to be using the drawing tools to create things. So what we have here is the hoop. So it's important to define the hoop, and you can do it in this wizard, or you can certainly do it in the main screen of the interface. But notice that the hoops that are given are only for Bernina and Burnett machines. There are no hoops for machines such as the Baby Lock Solaris or the Husqvarna Viking Designer Diamond. There's, those machines don't exist in this software. It's pretty much Bernina exclusive here. Also notice that, say for instance, if I'm dealing with this MIDI hoop selection here, there are actually 5 permutations of the MIDI hoop, and the MIDI hoop can be used like with foot number 26, which is your embroidery foot, foot number 43, which is going to be your Echo yarn couching foot, foot 44C, which is an Echo quilting and cutwork foot, foot 48, which is your crystal work foot. That's what we use to punch the templates for the crystals. And foot 93, which is for the paintwork tool. And the reason why they have a single hoop defined 5 different times is each of these feet have different dimensions to them. And the amount of space that you can use to design in a hoop is confined based by the size of the foot that you have on your machine. So for example, foot number 26, we're all familiar with that, that little teardrop embroidery foot. It's a tiny little foot, as opposed to the paintwork foot, which is this big honker extension that holds pens, etc. The amount of real estate that you can use in a hoop that has foot 93 on is much less than that if you had foot number 26. And by telling the machine which foot you have on, you'll see more realistically what will fit in that hoop. And so for this, I'm just going to go ahead and put on just the foot 26, and I'm going to say finish. And so I have my hoop on the screen, and what you'll see is the representation of the hoop. And then over here, this dotted line is the legal real estate where you can put things in. So that which is between the edge of the hoop and this dotted line, this is the space that the mechanics of the machine allows for the real estate of the embroidery foot. And so if I came up to, let me just come up here, this looks like a hoop to say it does. Notice that the shortcut key for this is Control H. If I left click on this, I can come in here and I can say, instead of foot number 26, I'm going to put on foot number 93, which is the big one. And I want you to pay attention to this line here. So when I click on OK, you'll see that that line has shifted inward, giving more space for that paintwork foot to reside when you're stitching things out or painting things out, as the case may be. I have also want you to know that when you're looking at this interface, you'll see that there are these guidelines here, which are pretty much standard in the software. You're going to see these things. If you didn't want to see guidelines, if you go under View and you come over here, again, View, and down here, this is where you can turn on and off different things. Like you can turn on and off the viewing of the foot, of the hoop, which in turn takes away the guidelines, by the way. You can also say, show me the hoop. So the hoop's there again. And now I want to turn off the guidelines. And so the hoop's still there, but the guidelines are not. If I come up here to View and say the grid, which are these little dotted lines here, I can say turn off the grid. So now the grid is gone. I can come up here and I can say hide the rulers, and now the rulers are gone. So case in point, if you're looking at your screen and you're saying, Shannon, my screen looks nowhere near what your screen is looking like. I don't see a hoop, I don't have guidelines, I don't have a grid, etc. You don't have to reinstall the software. The first thing you do is go up here to where it says View, click on this. And if there is not a yellow check mark on things that are of interest, such as those rulers, don't know why you would turn off the rulers, I would keep those on. And I would also say, let's get the grid back on. And I'm going to leave the guidelines off at this point. So there's also a sequencer here. I'm going to kind of hover over it. You can kind of see the sequencer shows me the different objects that are on the screen. It might be a paint fill, it might be a crystal. There's nothing here because there's, of course, nothing here. If I went ahead and put something in there, let me go ahead over here. I'm going to the left. This is one of my drawing tools. It looks like a circle. Notice that on some of these icons, there are little black triangles. And these little black triangles are telling me that there are other tools that reside with this. If I left click on this, left click and hold, I should say, I eventually get a flyout. And here I can come over and choose a different tool to create an object. I'm going to go ahead and create a square for you. Notice that once I clicked on that tool, which was over here, First thing is it's active, and hence it is yellow in color in the background. And also the icon itself has now changed. So one of the things I appreciate about DesignWorks is that depending on the tool that you're using, the icon or the arrow will change. So I'm going to just left click and drag, and I'm going to create a rectangular square type of thing here. Notice one of the things I do appreciate about DesignWorks is that this gives me a lot of information. First of all, I can see that I still have my tool selected because the cursor looks different. And if I wanted to get rid of that tool, I can tap the space bar on my keyboard, and that in essence does two things. It lets go of the tool, and so hence if I come up here, you see how there's a yellow box on that selecting tool, which is right here. I can, it also selects the last object that was created. Now I'm going to zoom in on this, and there's a couple of ways that you can zoom in on an object. The most direct way is to hold your cursor over the object, and with your scroll wheel on your mouse is just push the mouse forward. Notice that I'm using the word mouse here as opposed to touchpad. I am of the ilk. I've been doing digitizing for a while now. I do not use a touchpad that's built into your notebook computer to navigate in software, to draw and things of that nature. I just find it's a world of hurt. I would highly recommend in any embroidery design software or drawing software or DesignWorks to use a physical mouse with a scroll bar, scroll wheel, as well as a left and right mouse button. So I have this blue square, and I can tell you what this is in a couple of ways. The first thing I want to point out is when I come over to the sequencer, do you see how the sequencer now has an object in it, which is this guy here? And in fact, if one of the things I appreciate, if I'm going to back out here a little bit, if I come up to the sequencer and just hover over that sequencer page, do you see how it kind of brings the object kind of into focus? It kind of highlights it for me. That's a lovely thing that it does. The other thing is this tells me there is one object or one tray. The tray is selected because it has a green border around it. And there are these two tabs that are around this, by this sequencer tray. This first tab is telling me that this fill is a painted fill. In fact, if I zoom in on this, you can see that it looks kind of like a paintbrush. The second tab here is telling me that there is no object there. There's no line. There's no outline in essence. The other way I can tell what makes this object up is if I come down here, and I should say this is not telling me there's no object. If there was no object, it would be a red X there. Beg your pardon. What this is showing me is there's a stitched object of some sort. And if I come down here, let's follow my lead here, I've got in this palette that's down here two sections. This section here, which is called threads, and as you can imagine, it's outline stitches, like running stitches, that type of thing. And then over here, what I have are painted objects, hence the term brushes. If you notice, I don't have anything that says crystals, because remember, software does cut work, paint work, and crystal works. I don't have anything like color-wise here related to crystals. That'll be found in this object properties window, which is up here. Further notice that when you're looking at an object, and again it's selected, I can tell it's selected because it has these selection handles around it, and also the sequencer once again has a green outline around it. Notice that I have two tabs up here, very similar to the two tabs that are down here. The first tab is going to be your fill properties, and the second tab is going to be your outline properties. So left side is fill, right side is outline. Left side is fill, right side is outline. I can come up here to my outline tool and I can click on it because there is an outline around here. And this can create outlines based on stitching, like currently it's a running stitch. And if I still wanted whatever the object is to be created in thread, I could make it a decorative stitch of some sort. And I'm just going to select one at random here. So I've got this decorative stitch here. And I can tell you that it's it is right up along the side of the shape. Let me zoom in on this so you can see a little bit better. I'm just going to use my scroll wheel. And we can see that it's created these black circled outline stitches. If I selected another stitch, you'll see how it updates. If I select yet another stitch, you'll see how it updates. One of the things I will say about DesignWorks software is it has a ton, and I mean a ton, of different outline stitches. This is phenomenal software for creating things like applique stitches, if you're doing crazy patching types of things. It's just amazing, all of the different stitches that it has. In fact, if I scroll all the way down, let's just take a look here. Still going. So it has, well, these are quilting. Let me come up here. So it has 350 decorative stitches. And so let me just kind of back out of here again. So lots of different stitches, which is wonderful. Now that's all sewn stuff. Again, that 0 means like sewn. I could come in here and say, let me go ahead and put some crystals. And so if I do crystals, do you see how this is now updated? It's still a painted fill, but now there's a crystal outline. And do you remember when I was saying that there's no like color palette here for crystals? Your color palette is actually here. So it's here that I could say choose a different color crystal. Let me just kind of put something different in it. And I can also change the size of that. So these 4 sizes, 6, 10, 12, and 16, these are the millimeters of that. And this is it in inches. So we can understand that by different measurements. These 4 sizes represent the 4 different cutting tools that we have in the Crystal Work package. So those are the 4 different sizes that we can use to create Crystal Work designs. So as I'm looking at this object that is selected, if I come in here and I'm going to draw another object, instead of a square, let me go ahead and draw a circle. So I'm over here at the circle, and I'm going to come over here, left click and drag. Notice I can make ovals, or I can make circles. If I hold down the control key, what happens is it confines the circle to a perfect circle. And that same behavior would, of course, occur with a square. If I hold down the control, I would get perfect square as opposed to a rectangle. In this software, let me go ahead and delete that. I'm going to just hit the space bar. That's selected. I'm pushing delete on my keyboard. The other thing that this will do is if I, again, grab hold of my circle tool, and instead of just the control key, if I also hold down the shift key, what it's going to do is draw the circle from the center. You can see it's from the center now out. See how it's going from the center of that quadrant out. So this is really nice. It's easier to place objects in DesignWorks, I think, than in many other software packages. So I have another shape here. I'm going to go ahead and let go of the toolbar. This time I'm going to do it, I'm going to let go of the circle tool. This time I'm going to do this by coming up to this select rectangle. Remember, we can also get there by tapping the space bar, and it selects the last object that I made. Notice that here we have the sequencer once again, and it's showing me I have 2 objects. One, the first thing I created, number 1, is the painted circle with the crystal outline. And if you notice, the circle is selected, and notice the green outline around tray number 2. This is the second thing that I created. and that consists of a painted outline and a painted fill and a stitch outline. Notice also a lot of sequencers, they work from the top down, like this would be the first thing that stitches out, the second, the third, the fourth, etc. When we create in DesignWorks, it works the opposite way. The first thing that is made or created or stitched or painted is always in tray 1, which is always in the bottom. So this works if you were stitching this out from the bottom to the top in the sequencer as opposed to the other way around. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. We had talked about the fact that there are these paint chips here, and paint chips and thread colors per se. So right now, as I hover over these threads, do you see how it says company name RGB? So this is just giving me kind of color information, but it's not a thread palette. So the first thing I'd like to show you is how you can tell the software what threads you're using in your software. So in order to do that, let's go up here to Tools and go under Edit Palette. And it's here that I can tell the software what is my actual thread palettes, not just RGB values. And so like here, I have all of the different threads that this software can understand. And I'm just going to select Isocore. We know this as Isocore. I guess Europeans know this as Ackerman Isocore. And the same thing with the brushes. Like I can select a specific brush palette. And so if you have the Paintwork tool, many times you get a package of Edding Textilstifte. Sounds German to me. And so I can say, this is the specific palette that I'm using, these Edding pens. There are other palettes like Stained by Sharpie. I've used those as well. So very cool. I also use like Fantastico, which is by Tsukaniko Inc. Fantastico, once again, love them. Very good coverage. It's really color fast on fabric. And I will say that I don't see that here, so I would probably leave that as RGB, and then I will just put in the colors that I want. But this is how you tell the software what you're using. And now if you notice when I hover, it's telling me this is Isocore color 5233, and this one here is a Edding pen, and it's color 4600, etc. So the next thing I want to cover again is we're looking at these thread palettes here and the color brushes here. So let's define how we can change colors on both outlines as well as fills, and how to, in essence, read what we see on the page. So again, I have these two objects here. I'm going to just move this object up, and I'm going to move this object down. And so just working on the circle. Again, I know it's a circle because that is selected because I've got the 4 handles around it. And furthermore, let me just zoom in on this a little bit. Do you see how this gives me important information? Like this is, because it's a circle, it's a perfect circle, it's the same measurement, but it's 62.9 millimeters as far as the diameter of that circle. If I came up to the square here, let's just kind of zoom in here, and I'm going to purposely just make this a different size. Let's see. I'm going to first just delete this because I just drew a perfect square too, but let's just left click and hold, and we're going to get our circle, and this time we're just going to draw a rectangle, and I'll put once again on this rectangle, I'm going to put some crystals around it. So same kind of shape, except we just had not a perfect square, but a rectangle. And so now with that selected, again, just hitting the space bar, I can see that this is 19.3 millimeters wide and 55.9 millimeters tall. I appreciate the fact that the software gives me the measurement of objects, not only on the object itself, but as I come up here, let me bring this down just a bit, but it also shows me here that same information that I see on the object. You can see here the height and the width as such. So with this object, with this little rectangle selected, if you notice down here under the brushes, we see a little paint bucket here. And every one of these color chips, these are potential colors that I could use. Anything that appears down here are colors that are currently in the design. So let's say I wanted to make that a red rectangle. I would come over here and click on the red bottom color chip, and you'll see that I have this red chip now down in the used aisle, and that there's a little bucket underneath the lower right hand point of that little rectangle chip. If you notice, the blue icon did not go away, and the reason why the blue icon did not go away is because I still have a blue filled object there. In fact, if I just came up here, you're going to see there's the blue object. Again, I love how the software, if I hover over a tray, it takes me to the object. That's very nice. And again, if I clicked on that tray, do you see how now that blue paint bucket is selected on the blue color chip? When I'm looking at this blue circle object, I can see it's a blue fill, and I can see over here on the left that it is outlined in a black thread. So in this case, it is a running stitch. Now I could certainly go from any of these stitch objects to, say, a painted object, and let's just say we're going to put a painted line around this. You'll see that currently, because I clicked on that painted outline, that there is no longer anything selected under the thread palette. And if I came over to the brushes, you'll see I have a new black chip here. And if you look in the upper left-hand corner of that black colored chip, you'll see there is a little pencil. So again, this is very illustrative of what we're seeing in the interface itself. It really gives us a lot of information. If you notice under tray 1, when I look at the two tabs here, they're both now painting tools for the fill as well as for the outline. If I wanted to take this filled object, and instead of having paint, I could say put crystals. Let me just go ahead and do a crystal fill real quick. You're going to see that that is now updated. And so now in the fill place, I have crystals, and in the outline, I still have my painted fill. Take note also that it did put in blue crystals. That's lovely. And if I come down here, you'll see there are no more blue chips, because again, my first object is what? It's a red fill with a crystal outline, and my second object is a blue fill of crystals and a black outline. If I wanted that black outline to be blue, I would simply come up to a blue color chip, which is right here with the object selected, and click in the upper left hand corner, and now you'll see that's updated. The black chip is gone. We have a blue outline on that object here. As far as the crystals themselves, if you wanted to see what type of crystal was in there, so I had to pause the video for a moment because I wasn't able to see my crystals here. And let me show you what I did off camera. So when you're looking at these different dockers, and like there's a docker here called like object properties, and there's one down here called palette, and there's one up here called tool options. And if you notice when I, let me just go away from there, you see how the tool options just hid, but there's a little yellow tab up there that says tool options. If I hover over the tool options, it will come down long enough for me to interact with this, change the size, mirror, rotate, etc. And then if I take my cursor off of that docker, it will fold itself back up. And that same behavior is true with the palette. If you see there's like a little thumbtack here. It's pointing in the down direction, which means that that docker is locked. If I unlock it simply by clicking there, you'll see that once again I've got a yellow tab down here that says palette, and if I hover over the palette, now I have access to these Docker controls for thread colors and paint colors. Notice the thumbtack is pointing to the left. I'm going to go ahead and point it down again. Same thing, same type of ability is up here. Again, here's the thumbtack is pointing down. If I click on this, this automatically hides away. Once again, if I hover over the object, it will be present. If I take this and I pull it away from, let me first lock it. If I pull this away, do you see how I can detach this? And I can put this anywhere I want in the interface. The issue is once it's detached, do you see how I can't see my crystals anymore? I can see the sizes, etc., but it reduced the size of this. If I come down below here, I can resize it and then once again get some crystals. So you can certainly resize all of these Dockers and leave them undocked. But I, for one, I like everything in a place, not floating like this. So notice that if I left click on, I'm going to call this the header of this Docker. Do you see how there are these tabs here? And I'm going to hopefully use my red circles, etc., to show you where these tabs are. I'm going to tell the software to dock it here. You can see when I go over that tab, there's a dark box there. And when I let go, that Docker is in place. The issue I was having, I believe, is this had been undocked. When I went to dock this, I did something like this, and this paint tool thing went all the way across, and it closed this off. And I really don't want this paint taking more of the real estate of what I can choose here. So I'm going to once again grab this, dock this on top. So this goes from here all the way down to the bottom, so it gives me that much space. So as I was saying, if I have crystals on here, you can see how it's highlighted here as far as what the color is that I used. If I have the crystals selected and say change the color to something else, let me just come up here and I'm going to change it to this kind of green. If I'm wondering what color of crystal is that, I simply select the tray and I can come down and I'm going to look for the highlighted one, which is right here, and that tells me what's what. Now, mind you, the crystals are just a placeholder for color, just like anything else here. Your embroidery machine and your paintwork tool doesn't know what paint or color that you have in it. So this is just a placeholder for color, so you know to change colors in essence and what that color was. So I want to talk a little bit more about these Dockers and things disappearing on you and all, because this is something that happens to all of us, including myself, quite often. The work surface, once again, being here, and it's surrounded in essence on all four sides by these various controls or Dockers, if you will. And one of the things I want to point out, if you notice, nothing is selected here, and so there are no tools that are being shown. And so again, if I'm just going to draw a simple shape, let me just left click and hold. I'm going to grab another type of shape just for something that's different. And in here we'll see we're going to be drawing this pie thing. And if you notice, I can go into my reshape tool here, and I can take this, let's just see here, I can take this and I can reshape this Pac-Man, if you will, to whatever I want. So that's what that particular tool does. It's not just a circle, it's Pac-Man. And if I wanted to make Pac-Man yellow, because remember that's what Pac-Man, those of you that are of the age, I think that's all of us, you would want to turn him yellow. So do you remember how to make a yellow fill? And if you say you would come down, let me first get my select tool. So I'm going to hit tab. By the way, before I make him yellow, do you see how there's like a little goober here? In fact, the goober has its own tray. This happened only because I was trying to reshape Pac-Man and I drew a little object here. And if I wanted to get rid of that goober, I just select it and hit delete. So it's just this this one painted object here. So if I want to make it a yellow Pac-Man, I can go ahead and just put the yellow fill there. And if I wanted to give him a little eye, I'm just playing right now, I can put a little circle here and I can draw his eye, and his eye needs to be black and there shouldn't be any outline. Now, before I just click on this, let me just show, once again, I drew an object and I had a yellow, a yellow fill with a black outline in essence. And what I want to do is I want to get rid of the outline. So with the eye selected, let me just select the eye, I'm going to come over here, and do you see how under threads there's this, it looks like the color is white? And you have the same thing over here in brushes. It looks like it's white. It's not white, that's the delete. And you can delete specifically certain things. Like with this selected, I can delete the outline here, so I won't have any outline. And you can see that goes away. And if you notice, the chip is still there, because if I come over to Ms. Pac-Man here, again, you see the eye, it has the X there under outline. X means there's nothing there now. That's outline. If I click on Ms. Pac-Man, circle means there's thread. I'm going to come over to the thread tool, and I'm going to also turn off the thread color. So now I just have these two outlines, these two painted areas without outlines. And that's how you can make Pac-Man. Notice that because I have Pac-Man on here, I now have my object properties that is up and beautiful. It's populated. I have information down here under the palettes, and I have information up here under the toolbars. As we already discussed, if I left click on the thumbnail, that will hide these various toolbars out of the way. If that's what I want, I would get maximum real estate for designing if I did that. To bring it back up, I would just simply hover over that, click down on the thumbnail. And the same thing holds true here. I'd come up like this, and I would click on the thumbnail. Now that's locked. Same thing here. Come over here, click on the thumbnail. All right, so that's a good review. So let's say that I come into the software and this tool, tool properties is no longer there. There's no yellow thing here saying tool outlines. This happens to me. If you don't see like the little tab like you see here with palette, it means that the tool itself is turned off. And how you turn it back on is you go under View, and then under View come all the way down to where it says Tools, and then come all the way over here, and see these are the three dockers: the tool options, the object properties, and the palette. Notice there is a missing check mark under tool options, so I simply click on tool options. Now that is back to where it needs to be, and it's in a locked state. If I wanted to go ahead and fill this eye with a outline, I can click here, because notice before I do that, notice that let me just click on the fill here. If I click on this pencil, do you see how nothing happens? It doesn't switch over to the pencil for object properties, and that is because there are no object properties for an outline, because there are no outlines. So if this happens where you can't select the pencil, you have to put an outline around something. So I'm going to go ahead and select the black eye, and you can see me down here under the black paint chip. I'm going to do a black outline, and it is going to be outlined with the black color. And the same thing here with the yellow Pac-Man. I'm going to select him, and I'm going to make him with a yellow outline. So it'll look kind of the same, but there is, in essence, you can see if I zoom up here, there's an outline now around that shape. And I can also now click on the outline tool and define further what it is. It defaults to this line, painted line, in essence. If I wanted to turn it into, say, a satin stitch around this Pac-Man, where it's thread. Here's my satin cereal. I can click here, and that has now turned this into a satin outlined object. So this is another thing that happens in class a lot, and that is that they can't find their sequencer. So that was the thing with the trace that we saw in this upper right corner. It doesn't have to be here. It can be anywhere, but it does have to be on the screen for you to see it. So the first thing I remind people is the sequencer is for you to choose things. And for you to choose things, you have to have the selection tool selected. So I can come up here and select the select tool. And as soon as that's selected, notice that the sequencer appears, and I can move this to wherever I want it to be moved. I can also do things like fold the sequencer up so it's there, but it's not taking up real estate. Let me bring that guy back down. I can come over here. This is going to show if there's like a little object, like that little eye was like, it was little, and I couldn't see it. So this is for little things. It's a way to magnify what's there. I can also come over here with the paint part, and if I had painted objects, they would come up in view. This is a little question mark, and if I click on the question mark, I get a little question mark that's on my cursor, and I can come to any part of the software, and like I can click right here, which is what I just clicked on, and when I click here, it brings up the help, and it will give me some information based on what I clicked on. So this is the welcome screen in essence. If I click on the question mark again, I also have that tool up here. This is your help thing. I can come over here and say click on this, and this will give me a pop-up of what all these various and sundry icons mean and do, and that's what we're doing here in video form. But I wanted you to be aware that we do have a manual here. It's pretty decent, and we can have access to seeing things by using the question mark in all these various places. If I happen to do this, and this happens to the best of us, now I have closed off my sequencer, my object manager, and it doesn't matter if I'm on like a drawing tool or if I'm selecting the select tool, that guy is gone. So what you need to do is just as we did with the various palettes or dockers, is you go up under view and you need to make sure that sequence manager is indeed selected, and then it magically reappears. Again, you can move them over here. I just tend to put them over here, and that doesn't mean you can do something different. If I grabbed hold of here, do you see how I can make the sequencer smaller? And that has its utility, because if you have a lot of objects here, it lets you see more objects, like numbers. So if I know exactly which number I need to go for, if there's 23 objects, that's kind of a nice way of doing that. I can make this longer. I can make this wider so I can see more of the tray. So this is resizable, just like a lot of these other windows are resizable. So that is the sequencer, that is the dockers. Let me come up here into the tool options, I should say. And what I want to do is I'm going to come over here and let me just click on 100%. So this is going to show things in real size. Notice that I have XY. XY means where is this, in essence, this little eye located in space, and it's 10.36 millimeters above where the x-axis is, which would be over this way, and it is 61.89 millimeters up. So your y-axis is this way, and your x-axis is this way. If I took this eye, selected it, and I put in 0, 0, which means the center of the hoop, and if I hit enter, the eye, let me back out a bit, the eye is now indeed into the center of the hoop, but he's no longer on Pac-Man. So I'm going to take him, put him back up, and notice that these numbers change. This is showing me the size of the eye. This is the percentage of the scaling. Generally speaking, when you're resizing things, generally speaking, you want it resized proportionately. And it's with this here that I can uncheck or check that I can proportionally manually change things, as opposed to grabbing one of these selection handles and pulling to resize. If I grab, let me go, I'm going to do this with the Pac-Man so the selection handles are a little bit bigger for everyone. So if I'm resizing manually, if I come over to a corner, do you see how I've got these double pointed arrows? And if I left click and drag, this is going to proportionately resize the Pac-Man guy. If I click on one of these horizontal or vertical nodes, selection handles, I can disproportionately skew this. I'm going to go ahead and undo. Undo is right up here, and I can just click here. It's also Control-Z is your shortcut, and that brings them back. DesignWorks is really nice in that these nodes have multiple purposes. So the one that disproportionately resizes, if I come out just a little bit, do you see how the node just changed to kind of a diagonal line? This is an italicized or a skewing of the design. So I could do something like this. I'm going to hit Control-Z to undo. If I come up here to where my proportional resizing is, if I come just a little bit off of that, do you see how it turns into a circle? And if I click here, the object will rotate. I'm going to go ahead and undo. If I grab hold of this, this is my center of axis of rotation. Generally, it's going to be in the center of the object. If I take him and bring him out here, for instance, then grab hold of the rotation, do you see how the Pac-Man will now rotate according to where that center point is? And when I let go of that rotation, do you see how the center point came back into the center of the object? I'm going to go ahead and undo that as well. So a lot of information. Size, rotation, proportionally and disproportionately changing an object, skewing an object, rotating on the center axis or rotating, just as I showed here. I'm going to do this, just move them out here just a bit, or rotating off center. All of those things are possible with the selection handles selected. So what I have here are a series of circles in different colors. And if I click on one, I hope that you guys, by looking down here, can tell me what that particular circle is made of. If you said it was a green fill and a drawn or stitched outline in black, you would be absolutely correct. If you notice, when you have multiple objects, you see over here on the sequencer tray how you have, looks like two light bulbs here. It's not a fill and it's not a draw tool. That generally is saying that this is a sequenced object. And if I come over here to the automatic sequence control, if I click on that and just say do nothing, leave as is, you'll see that I can see each of these objects. And now with just one object represented on each of the trays, you can see that this is comprised of a painted fill and a stitched object. Again, that little circle there. Also notice that I have the green object selected, and can you tell me in the sequence tray which is this object? And if you say number 4 because there is a green outline, there you are definitely a winner. So what I'm going to show you is how you use these alignment tools that are up here. And so let me go ahead and just kind of draw a box. It's these tools here that we're going to be discussing next. And so let's go ahead, and I'm going to, let me just click off that. I'm going to first go ahead and select all of these little circles, and I'm going to go over to this, which is very descriptive. It says to align left, and if I click there, everything is aligned to the left. If I undo, that just brings everything back what it was. I can also say align everything to the right. And so let me go ahead and undo that again. You can see that the last two guys here, maybe a better way to illustrate this is if I drew a box around these objects. Let me try this. So these 3 objects are selected. And now if I say align right, do you see how the most rightward object, which was the red and the green, the yellow snapped over and aligned there. Okay. So if I select these 3 and say I want to align all the centers. All the centers are aligned. Let me undo that. I'm going to take this, move this object further over here, and I'm going to select these three once again and say align centers. It did the exact same thing, but what I wanted to show you, I wanted to bring this object further out, is you also have something called distribute. This is what distribute is. And so when I click on here, we should see this orange one kind of snap towards the center. Let's see. And it does that, so that's good. Let me go and undo that, and I'm going to undo this. So these are kind of back to where they had been. If I wanted to say I have this object, let me grab here. This object's here. This object. See what I'm looking at, guys, and let me kind of zoom in here to this just a bit, is when I'm moving an object, do you see again how my cursor changes? I'm looking for this four-pointed arrow, this guy here. If I get the four-pointed arrow and I'm over this axis of rotation, see the little X there in the center? If I move this, all that's going to do is move the axis of rotation. That's not what I'm after. I'm actually after moving the object, and I need to be really hovered over the outline of the object, and then if I click and drag, we can kind of see how that moves accordingly. And I'm going to put that little yellow circle down here. Let me zoom back out. I'm just pulling back on my scroll wheel. And now what I'd like to do is I'm going to select all of these little circles, the blue ones off on its own. And the first thing I'm going to do is just tell it to align all the centers. And so this is going to be align centers vertically, which is this guy here. That did what I wanted it to. And now I want to distribute the objects. And you see how these two kind of equalize like such. So in addition to what we just showed, I want to show a couple more things. First thing is, and I've never really done this in class before, so this was kind of a new thing for me as well. I'm going to go ahead and select this, this little red circle. I'm going to bring the red circle here, and I'm going to grab this green circle, and I'm going to bring the green circle up about like such. And the first thing I want to do is I'm going to take these two circles and I'm going to make sure that their centers are aligned. And so that would be the horizontal center alignment, and they are aligned. Let me zoom in here just a bit. Perfect. And what I thought was very interesting is these making the same size functions. So this is making the same size in width, making the same size in height, and of course globally. And so with circles, it's going to pretty much be a global thing. And so what I want to show is I'm going to take this red circle and I'm going to just increase its size. And then it's the order of this that you need to be wary of. And I believe if I don't get it right the first time, hopefully I'll get it right the second time. The object that you want to change, you select first, and then the target, what you want it to change its size by, you select second. And you can see how these icons have now become active, and I'm just going to make this globally become the same size. So hopefully the green circle will become larger, and it did. And it's the same size as this other circle. Let me just once again align the center. So that's the same. That's like cool, I think. I wish we had more tools in other programs that did things like this. Let's say if I took the circle here and I'm going to shrink him down in size just a bit like such. And again, it's the same skill set. This time I'm going to make the red circle change in relation to the green. So my target is the first thing I'm going to select. My template, or what I want it to size to, is going to be the second thing I set. Now, instead of just making it the same size both in height and width, because that's just what we did, let me just say I want to make it as tall as that green object. And so when I click here, you see how the red object, let me just align middles again, the red object now turned into a oval, but it's the same height as the green object. That to me, I think is pretty cool. I like that. So let me go ahead and undo that. And I'm going to undo again and undo just to bring everything kind of back to where it had been. And that's about where we had been. So the other tool I didn't go over is align to the top and align to the bottom. So again, if I select this as my my target, this, or let me see, I'm going to select this as my target, what I want it to affect, and I want it to affect to this. So this is the second thing I select, and I'm going to say align bottoms, and you see how it aligned everything to that yellow little circle there. If I, let me undo. If I say, let me unselect everything. So so this is going to be my target. These are going to be the two things I want to affect change. If this works, all these things should be aligned to the bottom of the red. So I'm going to select these two, and the last thing I select is going to be my template, and I'm going to say align to the bottoms, and see how everything aligned here. So these alignment tools are very powerful, and just because I can, I'm just going to distribute everything evenly there. And again, the take home when you're aligning things all the way to the top or all the way to the bottom, or proportionately or disproportionately resizing, is you first select the things you want to change, and the last thing you select is the template or where it's going to change by. And I think if that is not perfectly clear, I can appreciate it took myself a while to wrap my head around it. I think I've got a fairly good handle on it, and we can certainly answer any questions as we work together in class. By the way, in your Dropbox folder, there is a file called Alignment Exercise Tools, where I just made all these little circles for you so we can play with this in class. And I'm going to pause the video here just for questions, as well as working with these alignment tools, because this is something I think is important to get your head around. So the next set of tools that I want to talk to are up here, and these three tools are the weld tool, the trim tool, and the intersect tool. And how these work in essence is, let me first kind of zoom into these two circles, and I'm going to, for these to work as the icons are depicting, these objects, or whichever objects you're using these with, need to overlap. So I'm going to take this yellow circle and I'm going to overlap it with the yellow. So the yellow is on top of the blue. And it's interesting, if you hover over the blue, do you see how you see the outline of the blue circle behind the yellow circle? So I like that about, again, the software. It's very graphic. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select both objects, and I'm going to hover over the weld tool, and I'm going to go away from the weld tool, and then I'm going to come back into it again. And what you can see is, you see how the blue turns yellow? It's kind of giving you a preview of what's going to happen when you click on this. And so as I click on this, what happens is it turned what used to be two circles into this kind of cloud shaped type of thing. So this is weld. It takes two objects and combines them into one. I'm going to go ahead and undo that. Both objects are still selected. I'm going to now hover my mouse over the trim, and as I come over the trim, you can see that this red outline here. Just look down there, the red outline. That's going to show you what's going to happen. And in essence, what's going to happen is we're going to trim away part of that yellow object by using that blue object. And so as I click here, the trim has taken place. I'm going to deselect, and if I pull this away, you can see now that I've taken kind of a chunk out of that yellow circle and in essence made it into a 3/4 moon. I'm going to go ahead and bring that back and undo. So now we have the objects as they had originally been. And the last one we're going to talk about is intersect. And again, as I hover over intersect, look at the red outline here. So this is showing me what this is going to do. It's going to take whatever is overlapped, keep that, and trim away the rest. So when I click here, now I have this object, and if I click and bring this away, you see how I have created a football shape. Of interest to note with this particular tool, trim is the one that creates a new object but doesn't destroy the two that were before. So this is not a weld and it is not an intersect. It is a trim. So I could, of course, come in here and with both objects selected and once again trim that same shape if I needed to and make yet another one of these things. These three objects, the weld, the trim, and the intersect. The intersect, again, the last thing we talked about, it's the intersect that gives you that new object. This, by the way, this question mark, we see these question marks in a couple of places in the software, namely here, and there's also a question mark down here. These two question marks take us to the same location, which is the help manual. So when I click here, I get a question mark, and then I can come over to say something we've already talked about, which was, say, this intersect tool. And when I click on this, it goes to the manual, and it talks about the intersect. So again, I do like that ability to get right to the point of things in the manual if you need a little more help on things. So the next series of icons, they live right here. And these are pretty much how we view the software, how we interact with the hoop. So let me start first with the with this fabric one. This fabric icon, if I click on this, this is going to take us to the first part of the wizard when we first came into software. And you may recall it's here that I can change the color of the background. But also if I was dealing with embroidery, you can see they have these different degrees of compensation stitches that they lay down with the embroidery. If you're dealing with an embroidery design, generally speaking, those things are already set for you. This I find that they're pre-made. This I find is more for the software version of this program where they can create embroidery, which this is not. But if, say, you were dealing with something like this, you could say, I want to stitch this on fleece, either woven or with nap. If I click on this, it gives me a fleecy type of appearance of the fabric. And if I had, say, this, I'm just going to select this just because we can. You can kind of see if we zoom in here, it's kind of a fleecy texture to it. It might be nice to kind of, like, I don't know, see things as realistically as possible. I don't personally use this feature, so I'm just going to say none on that. Again, we can change the color. The second one, this has to deal with, we talked about this prior, changing the color of our threads and of our brushes down here, and it defaults to the RGB values, but if you wanted a specific thread palette, that's where you have that, and specific fabric markers, these are the ones that are on offer, and then that would populate accordingly. And then this last one, this has, to my mind, this has more utility for my day-to-day working in in DesignWorks. And so if I click on this, this is giving me a hoop screen, and I can do very important things here. Like the first thing is I can go ahead and select my hoop. You may recall during the new wizard where we went through the fabrics and what source of the artwork or embroidery we were dealing with, or for that matter, what size hoop or what foot we have on, this thing came up. But if you want to get back into that part of the video or that part of the wizard, simply by clicking on the hoop and selecting hoop, you can change your hoop. And I'm going to just go ahead in here and just make that foot number 43, but not with that hoop. How about let's do the large oval, foot 43, and say OK. And you can see that the hoop kind of moved and it brought everything into the center of it, which is cool. If you notice, sometimes you don't have these highlight bars, these scroll bars, these things that are they're generally they're generally located here and here. But do you see how there's no little bar for me to move things, so I can't get this into the center of the screen? So what I can do is, if I just left click and drag and just kind of touch the ruler, do you see how I can kind of shimmy this where I want this to be? And what happens is, if it shimmies down, you see now I've got like a little scroll bar that magically appeared here. If I zoom in, now I have a scroll bar here that comes in. If this was to the point where, let's just say if I'm over here, now this is off, now you see I got a scroll bar down here that I can move. So I guess what I'm getting at is, if your hoop is like in this location, you're not going to see the scroll bars. So how you get them is by changing your magnification. And if there isn't a scroll bar, you can left click, drag, touch the area where you want the hoop to move off from. Something like this. I also, if you notice, this hoop is at 0, 0, and sometimes what happens is hoops can move off. Let me just take these guys and kind of move these over here, and let me take this and I'm going to rotate this by 90 degrees. This is how you would do this. So this changes position. If I want to get these objects into the hoop, I just need to go ahead and click on the hoop icon and say Center Design to Hoop. And when I click OK, it does just that. So that's how you can kind of work with the graphics of the hoop, centering it, rotating it, changing the foot, changing the hoop, all done here. So what I want to go over next is going to be the Reshape tool. And if you notice right here, this is what we're talking about. This Reshape tool works very similar to other programs out there. First thing I'm going to do is I want to go ahead and get rid of the hoop because I don't need to see this for this exercise. So again, how we get rid of the hoop is we're going to go up over the View tab here, and we're going to go down to where it says Hoop. So as I'm coming down here, it says Hoop. So I'm going to click this, and now that hides it. If I wanted to bring it back, I can simply go back up to View Hoop, or I can select this, and then when I select my hoop, that will come up as well. So let me first bring in a design for us to work with, and I'm going to go ahead and navigate, and I wanted to do this on camera, to where the general designs are that are built into the software. And so if I go over to the Open Design icon, which is here, I want to navigate to the folder, and it always goes to the last place that I had been. So if I take this pull down, you'll see the path. And what I mean by path is going to be these objects. Whoops, let's try that again. Path. It is going to be, let me get that off. It's going to be these objects right here, starting from C, Users, Public, Public Documents, Embroidery DesignWorks, Samples, and this is a paint design. If I clicked one up, you're going to see these are the folders that are in my particular location. The training may not be there. That might have been something we got at Bernina University, but you'll see many of these same folders. And again, I want the paintwork folder, and this is what's going to bring this up. You'll see that the file type is, again, the .draw, which again is the native format for the software. And I'm going to bring this owl figure on the screen. And that's what we have here. So notice that when it brought it up, it also brought up the saved properties. So notice how that the background had changed colors, as well as the hoop being present again. So I'm going to go ahead under View. I'm going to get rid of the hoop once again. And if I wanted to change the background color here, remember that's going to be up here where it says the Select Fabric. And we can just like maybe make that a white background. It might be a little easier for y'all to see. So if I want to use the Reshape tool, what I need to do is first take note of what does this design comprise of. As I can see, there are 8 trays. Do you see how it starts with number 2? So number 1 is still there. It's just that the window's a little smaller. Notice that if I slide this over just a bit, if I come and hover over the slide tray, do you see how there's a scroll bar right here? It's similar to what's over here with the workspace. And I can take this and I can scroll down and you'll see number 1. So again, we have the fill and the outline. This is all paint, all paint. There's no outline around this, no outline around this, but it's still paint. These are fills, excuse me, these are outlines without any paint. If I come further up, you'll see that these are all fills without outlines, and this is something that's filled and outlined. So I just wanted to review that with you. And also, as I may have said earlier, but if not, I'm going to say it now. Notice that some of these objects in the trays are relatively small. I can't really appreciate. So this little guy here, the second icon, let me see if I can just go ahead and highlight what I'm pointing to here. This guy right here. This one, if I select this, what it does is it brings these icons that are small on the tray and they enlarge them so you can have a better appreciation. Like this is the little pupil of the eye here. So I want to go ahead and reshape, and so in order to do that, I need to go ahead and select an object. And you'll see that the object that I selected is object in tray number 2, which you can see here. There's a green border around that, just to review. And if I wanted to reshape, I would come up to the Reshape tool, and that's going to draw the nodes for me so I can move these nodes around. And I'm going to go ahead and zoom into this right arm here, and you can see that the nodes, depending if they're smooth or if they're cusps, are either squares or they're circles. Circles mean smooth, and if I clicked on that, you'll see that there are, I'm going to call these paddles, some people call these handles, and what this allows me to do is to change the curve. As you can see, it updates for me. I can bring these little paddles in closer, which means the curve is not as affected as acutely. This is kind of elongating. You can kind of see how that curve is updated. So again, with these paddles or selection handles, do note that you can rotate, but you can also bring them closer in or pull them further out. Closer in is going to affect changes more in the locale, and pulling them out will affect more the general outline of that curve. This being a cusp node, you'll see it has one arm here and one arm here, and they move independent of one another. So I can form various sharp, acute angles with this, as opposed to, again, a smooth node where if you grab hold of one paddle, the other paddle moves. And if I came in here and, say, grabbed hold of this, and I can pull it out, if I grab hold here and hit the space bar, that will select, but I go out of the reshape mode if I touch the space bar. So I'm going to go ahead and reselect that. If you hit the backspace on the keyboard, that will oftentimes, if you're drawing, will eliminate the point, but I have to be actively drawing for that to happen. If I right click, I get additional functions. Like I could split this line, and if I split it, notice that the fill has been taken out of this object because it's no longer a closed shape. I'm going to go ahead and undo that. if I right click on here once again, and I can see I can add a node, I can delete this node, I can change this from a smooth to a cusp, so now it's a cusp outline, and once again you'll have two independent handles that will move. Let's try that again. Cusp. But you kind of catch my drift. This is just how you can reshape objects. So the next tool I want to talk about are actually the drawing tools here. And your icons might look different than mine. Again, just pay attention to whenever you see the little black triangle in the lower right column. That means that there are more than one tool. Like say for instance the zoom tool, which I don't know if we've covered. I don't think we have. If I click on it, you see I've got a magnifier held onto my cursor, and if I just left click through a magnifying box around the eye, it goes up to the eye. I can also take this, and this is now to zoom out. And if I take this, this is zoom all, so it kind of zooms it to fit. If I take this, I'm able to take my pan tool. And again, this would be another way that you could relocate objects, similar to what we were talking about as far as just if I was in the select tool. Remember how I can just kind of left click and hold and tap, and I can move the screen around this way. So this is kind of like another way of panning. We talked about that earlier. But again, depending on the last tool that you were in, your icon will look differently. So I'm just going to put this back up to the magnifier, and it's on the magnifier. Going down to the drawing tools, which are here, I'm in something called the Magic Wand tool. And what this is, it's kind of like an automatic copy and paste for artwork. These are vectors, vector artworks. That's why if I come again and I select on, say, a specific piece here, you can see these nodes that comprise this element. If I take the Magic Wand tool and I click on, say, that wing, you see how that turned orange. If I tap my space bar, that selects it, and I can move this off to the side. And what it did is it just recopied whatever object had been down there to begin with. My default color was orange for new objects, which this is what this is. If I wanted it to make the same color as the little wing, the copy that is, I just simply click on the pink color, and now I have an exact copy. If I go ahead and touch the Magic Wand and, like, say, click into this heart, tap the space bar, move this off to the side, you'll see now I have a copy of that object. So again, Magic Wand, if you're needing to copy specific shapes to do something else with them, that's a nice tool. I'm going to go ahead and just Control A to select everything and to delete. And what I'd like to show you next are the other drawing tools. So let me first work with the freehand shape tool. And this is nice. It's a matter of just left clicking and holding and dragging. And as you can see, I can create any type of shapes. I can create angular nodes as I just draw, like with a pencil, or I can create rounded shapes just by writing accordingly. And as I let go, if I double right click, that sets the object down, and I can go ahead and create another object. So the next tool that I want to show is the Bezier tool. And the Bezier, as opposed to left clicking and holding, it's a series of left clicks. So if I just do a series of left clicks, you're going to get these angular, sharp, cuspy types of nodes. If I left click and then drag, what's going to happen is it's going to turn into a curved node. And I'm just going to double click to set that object down. Now, I'm just drawing lines here, but you know, of course, you can go into the properties and you can go ahead and apply any type of outline to that shape. So if I have this selected and I tell it that I want it to be this little chain stitch, you can see there's your chain stitch. And similarly, if I select this first object and click here, now I have little circles. You know, so that's how you set this down. You'll understand that this is all thread work at this point. That's what it defaults. It's a running stitch, which is thread. You can see down here, once again, it's a black running stitch. I can change the color. I could also turn it into to paint by just touching the outline for the paint. And like if I touched here, then now that becomes a kind of painted fill. Notice that the line work with the paint tool consists of lines like such, like outlines, or you could do zigzags for a fill type of outline. So that's how you apply stitches. That's how you apply paint, simply by this guy here. You can also turn something like this into crystals. And so I'm just going to look at this same line here. And if I come over to where it says crystals, which is this little guy here, now I have crystals that are set down. It defaults to a size of 10. And I can, this is a light cyan. You can see because of this blue box around here. I can certainly change the color of the crystal to something else. And that's how you turn it into crystals for an outline. So I'm going to go ahead and just select all of this by drawing a box and hitting delete. Let me go into the next drawing tool. And that is, it looks like it's a great outline shape. This is very similar to the Bezier. Notice that every time I select a different drawing tool, the cursor changes. In this case, if I'm just doing a series of left clicks, they come down as curved points. I can still left click and draw and kind of get more sharp points here, but it's not the same as the Bezier. There's always a little bit of curve. This is always curved nodes. And how I know that, let me just double click to set that down. Go into the reshape tool. Let me zoom in here a bit. You're going to see that the nodes here are indeed these round shaped nodes. This guy here, for instance, this one up here. If I select one of these nodes, you can see that there are handles, once again, like we saw before, where I can reshape the nodes like such. And those are the drawing tools. Now this next tool is the font tool. It's the big letter T. And if I click on this, it brings up this tool option. And here this gives me the default font of Arial. If I left click into the space and I begin to type something like the word Bernina, for instance, you can see that this is indeed in that Arial font. And if I left click, and let me see if I can move this Bernina out from, select. I just want to get Bernina over here so you can see what happens when I am selecting this. Okay, and let me go back into this. So with this selected, Bernina selected, and I've got the font tool options back up by hitting the T. You'll see that as I do a drop down, do you see when I start hovering over these different fonts? Do you see how this object starts to update? Let me zoom in here just a bit so you can see better. In fact, I can just kind of use my scroll wheel. You can see how the fonts are just kind of going through. This is a way you can audition things. Like, so something like this is a nice big, bold type of font. This would be a good font to use for if you're going to do something like applique lettering, or say the paintwork tool, or crystals for that matter. As opposed to some of these were like this. This would be okay if you were putting down, say, crystals or maybe a painted line, but wouldn't be my first alphabet for, say, applique. So what I'm trying to show here, in essence, is that you can certainly scroll through and find various fonts that kind of float your boat. And if you wanted to go to like something that you knew, like say brush stroke, you can simply just click on the down arrow and select that which might be of interest to you. So again, continuing to work with fonts, I'm going to just hit our font tab here, and I have this Bauhaus alphabet chosen, which is a nice thick lettering. I'm going to go ahead and type in the word draw, all in capital letters. And then I'm going to go ahead and click on the select key. And what this is showing me in essence is I can come over here and resize. So I can take this, for instance, and make all of the letters taller, or again, all of the letters proportionately larger or smaller. If I wanted to change something like the baseline here, what I could do is I can go into reshape, and you see I have these nodes here. And these nodes, let me go ahead and get my cursor halo again so you can hopefully see my cursor a little bit easier. Yeah, so in any event, we have the nodes here. And I can click on this node and I can move the letter anywhere that I want to. If you notice, if I have my select tool, it still selects everything together. It's not selecting things independent of one another. And also, if I wanted to reshape these letters, when I go into the reshape tool, again, notice how I only have one node that I can move a letter around, but I can't individually make a letter larger or smaller or anything along those lines there. So in order for me to have more control over this object, there's a couple of things I can do. One is I can convert this object to curves. And so with the object selected, I'm going to right click and I'm going to say convert to curves. And now when I come over to my reshape tool, you can see that I have the ability to select one letter, and I can resize this letter. I can go ahead and move the letter to where I would like it. And I can also individually recolor that. No, I can't. I got to break that apart. So let me undo. I still can't. Let me just double check. Even if I have a single letter selected, let's see. If I have a single letter selected, can I change its individual color? And no. So things are still connected. Even if I change to convert to curves, these things are still connected. I can, of course, once again, move it, resize it, but I can't change an individual color until I convert the curves. What I can do is I can reshape this object. So if I wanted to bring this in more, I certainly could do that, independent of the other objects. If I took this object and say moved it off of the baseline, so it's like up here right now. Let me zoom out just a bit. Do you notice that up here all of my alignment tools are still grayed out? It is because, once again, this is considered still one object, but I can change, again, individual elements of that object. For me to make each of these separate objects, I do need to break this apart. Now, once you break something apart, what happens is if you break something apart, excuse me, you can no longer treat it as lettering. And also, I will say that even if I convert this to curves, which I did, it also lost its lettering ability. In other words, I can't go and change the font at this time once I've converted to curves. I'm going to go ahead and zoom this to fit. And again, how you can do this is, remember your magnifying lens here. This one here is set to zoom all. Notice the shortcut key is F4. I'm just going to click here, and that just brings it up close and personal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and right click, and I'm going to tell the software to break this apart. Once I break this apart, notice what happens up here. So I'm going to break this apart, and now these objects, these alignment tools all become active. And I can certainly take this D and the raw and put it all on the same baseline once again. If I wanted to reshape, I do have the ability to reshape each individual object. And if I wanted to go ahead and recolor, let me just get another type of color. I can recolor that individual letter to another color. You know, while I have this here, do take note that with this selected, let me just select everyone. With this selected, we can see that these are all filled objects and there's no outline. And when I zoom in on this, do you see how there's kind of like this jaggedy edge to it? It's kind of emulating what would happen with the fill. So as the pen's kind of going back and forth, you may not get the solid line here. So a good thing to consider is if I say select that letter D, and also, do you see how I'm coming down here to the brush palette bar? And I'm just going to select on the outline so that this first object has a painted fill and a painted outline. And when I come into this object, do you see how the border now looks more smooth as compared to the letter R here? So a consideration is, especially if you're working with painted objects, to put a painted outline around them gives you kind of a smoother finish, if you will. So the next tool I want to show you is the circle array tool. Otherwise, it's also called a rectangular array. It just depends on which of the two tools you choose underneath there. And you can tell there's two tools because of that little black diamond there, black triangle in the corner. So the first thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and open up a design. And so let me just go ahead and I'll click. Let me go ahead and close this prior one. I'm going to go ahead and just open up a design, and let me pick this one here, which is something I'd worked with earlier, and click on open. And here we have the design, and it's a pretty design. I'll tell you that it is predominantly a an outlined painted design with one example here of fill. And if I scroll further down, because again this is only tray number 4, so I know there are additional objects beneath, and you'll see that there's some fills here as well. So what I'm interested in is this gray part, this gray viney thing with the little black circles. And one of the things I can do is I can come down here into my color palette, and I can right click and I can say select by fill color. If I select by pen color, it's just going to choose the outline. The fill color will select just the fill. So if I click on this, and let me just kind of move this off to the side, you'll see that's exactly what I had chosen. So that's one way that you can select specific parts of the design. Unfortunately, I can't like control click and get the rest of these with that same function, but let me show you another way that I can get to that which I want. And sometimes the easiest way is just to remove that which you're not interested in at this point in time. So I just selected that green flower and I hit delete on the keyboard. I'm going to come up here, select these pink flowers, delete those. And if you notice, if I try to select this element here, I can't do it. I can't just select like that single element, or like say that single little dot here. And if I right click on it, let me first have it selecting everything. If I right click on this, do you see how it allows me to group this? So this is not a grouped design, but it is a combined design. And so I'll tell you, it's not grouped because you can see the two different elements here, you know. So what I want to do first is I'm going to go ahead and right click on this, and I want to break this apart. So now I'm seeing all of the individual elements. And if I do that, let me zoom out. I'm going to now come up here and just select these guys and delete. And then because I want to recombine this, I'm just going to right click and say combine again. So it makes it one object once again. The reason why I want to do that is I'm going to be working with the circular array tool. And as I work with this tool, the thing I don't want to have happen is leaving some elements behind because they were not selected. So again, if I just select any part of this design, everything is selected. So with this selected, my circular array tool now becomes active. And the last settings I had put in here are what is saved. So if I say put 9 step count, if I open this up again another day from now, this will say 9. So there's not anything specific about these defaults per se. What I will say is I generally, if I'm working with this type of tool, I like to work in odd numbers, like so 5, 7, 9, that type of thing. I'm just going to increase this to 7. And I'm going to zoom in here a bit. And it's going to be somewhat difficult to see because of all of the dark ink here. But there are these little selection handles here. And you can see as I grab that selection handle and pull this apart, you're going to see the original design, which is here. That's not part of what we're going to create. What we're going to create is these repeats that are around that circle. If you look up here under the tool options, you'll see a start angle and an end angle, and also a step angle. And you can certainly put in those numbers, but I'm pretty visual and I'm not really good with that math as far as dividing a step angle. A step angle is this angle here. It's the angle between two given elements. So if I grab hold once again of that node and say bring these around here, you can see how I can change its orientation. If I wanted to go ahead and change, let me grab up here, change the step angle. Do you see how I'm grabbing this node and I can change, if you look up at step angle, how the step angle changes? So it's still 7 repeats, but the angle becomes smaller, and so they're all kind of condensed into one quadrant per se. Or I can go kind of 360. It's again a very visual tool. Notice that if I click on this node right here, I can change the step angle. But if I move this in or out, it doesn't change it. If I get on the original angle, which is this one here, I can't change the step angle, but I can change how close they are to the center or further apart. As you're playing with this, again, I like it because it's a very visual thing. What I would say is, let me bring this out just a bit, kind of even that up. Yeah. What you can do is, as I'm rotating this, notice how the end of the stem is now the center element. And that can be very cool. If I continue to rotate, the top of that design now becomes the main focus. And that's kind of lovely too. So again, I'm going to come in here. Let me just do something along the lines of this, just so that we kind of get an idea of what's going on. And once I have something that I like, again, the center part is not part of the design, you click on Apply Circular Array, and that creates the design. And so I like this tool because you can create something that looks very complex with very little effort. Now, I'm going to go ahead and open up a new design. And let me just go into just something else. And I'm just going to go ahead and pick these little sunburst thing here and click on Open. So I have my little sunburst thing here. And what I want to show you is with this selected, I'm going to now go into the rectangular array. And the rectangular array works very similar to the circular array. As you can see here, I have 5 copies of vertical copies and 1 horizontal copy. And I'm thinking I'm not seeing them all because they're not all on the screen. There we go. So there's your 5. I can certainly come in here and say I want 3 horizontal rows of this. Now I have my 3 horizontal rows. And I can certainly play with these numbers, but once again, I just find it easier to kind of work visually with this. So I can bring these further apart, in essence, spacing them out further horizontally. Or with this one here, I can rotate. And with the vertical spacing, let's just see. Vertical spacing, if I grab this node, I can change the vertical and the horizontal. Kind of like when we resize an object. Right. And so, let me just kind of do something along the lines of this. And I'm just going to apply that array there. It's thinking about what I just asked it to do. And there's the design that I created in essence using that rectangular array. So circle array and rectangular array are really powerful tools to use. I could see using that rectangular array in particular if I was doing something like multiple copies of a design, such as if you were cutting out little badges with the cut work tool, that type of thing. It'd be fairly easy to make many copies of those evenly spaced out. So the next tool I want to show you is the auto border tool. And I'm just going to kind of draw an ellipse here, something along the lines of that. And then I'm going to hit the space bar once again to select the object, and then let me go into the auto border. And this dialog appears, at which point I can decide whether or not I'm going to position these borders to the inside of the object or to the outside of the object. And I can choose like what kind of distance I want and the number of repeats. Now, I'm going to leave this at 5, but you could certainly do any number of repeats that you want. This is of interest because this allows me to say that the ripples are going to be cut, which would not make sense here, but running for 5, that is. If it was something like, let me clarify. If I wanted to use this tool, like say I'm making a badge and I want a border of 4 millimeters, I could certainly do that, put 1 repeat, make that a cut, and you're good to go. But I'm just thinking more of painting and stitching and stuff. I could make this a run stitch. And if I did a run stitch, let's just say I'm going to click running stitch. And I'm going to say, again, the distance of 4 millimeters is fine. Let me just make that 6, just for something different. 5 repeats, okay. And I have this here. Now what I could do is I could come in here now. You can see that the last outline was chosen. And I can say put in a little decorative stitch. I can select the next outline and put another type of decorative stitch in. another outline. You catch the drift. And come in here, choose this, and here, and choose that. And you can kind of see you've got kind of a design that looks very complex, and you will wow your neighbors when you give, I don't know, like you could certainly put this on a card. Have you ever stitched on like cardstock and made greeting cards with embroidery? So something like that with the addition of the painted fill would be very lovely. And so that's that border tool. So I want to show you the angle tool, as her directions they call it, or the divide tool. And to do that, I'm just going to draw a shape. I'm going to use the create outline shape because that gives me smooth nodes throughout. And let me just go ahead and click on that. And I'm just going to kind of draw something along the lines of this. And again, you see how the icon will change, and that means now it's a closed object. That's what I want. That looks kind of like an egg. I want to kind of get an essence of leaf type of thing going on. So let me hit the space bar to select the object and go into the reshape tool. And I'm going to take this. Let me just bring this over just a bit. That's a little too much. Just so that the points are over one another a little bit. And I'm going to just right click. I'm going to turn this into a cusp. And by doing that, now I've got two different angle lines I can work with. And kind of shape things a little bit. So it'll be something along the lines of that. Now, currently, you can see that the painted fill is going in a north-south direction. But let's say I wanted to make, when this stitches out, for it to go in an east-west or crosswise direction. So what I can do is, again, hitting the select tool, selecting the object, and go into the directions. And if I left-click and drag across, that just changed the direction. So so this becomes more apparent because it's a pretty solidly filled object. I'm just going to go ahead and select the object, and you see under object properties where it says density. I can come in here and I can say, let me make that, I don't know, like 4 millimeter separation. And you can kind of see how the painted line is going to go in this direction here. If I wanted to put it on the diagonal, simple enough, again, just selecting that angle line and coming across here like this, and it updates. If you notice, what I cannot do is I can't have two angle lines in this object because it's one object. I can split the object and then be able to do that. And let me show you how that is done. So again, when we're dividing an object, important thing to do is not to use this fill, but use a zigzag or a row fill. So what I'm going to do is I have that selected. I have the density set at 4, so it kind of opens up the object so you can kind of see the stitch angles better. Let me just kind of zoom that in. Perfect. One of the things I did note is the software behaved a little funky when I selected right up on the node to divide it. And it might have been because that was the closing point of the object. I'm not sure. But what I found I had better success at is if I just come just off of that node. Let me kind of zoom in here just a bit. You see what I'm talking about? I'm not dividing it right here. I'm just dividing it just off of that node a bit. And so what I want to do is I'm going to come over here and left click and drag, and then I'm going to just go off of that other node as well. So the object's been divided, so I've got a left side and a right side, and now what I want to do is I'm going to go into the direction tool. And in the direction tool, I'm going to make one direction like such, and the other direction like this. And so what that gives us, let me just click off, it gives us a very cool effect, I think. So all the stitch angles aren't going in just one direction, which is nice. So what I want to talk about is how to set the default fill and pen color or stitch. And when you're setting your default, it's important not to have anything on your screen. And so if I come down here and say under this fill chip, let me just let me just draw a quick object. Normally when you're using your DesignWorks, you're going to get an effect like this. You're going to come up with a blue fill and a black stitched outline. You can see down here in the lower left and in the mid center of your screen with the brushes being blue. That's what the default is. And I have no problem with the default unless I want something else. And every time I draw an object, I don't want it to be a blue fill with a stitched outline. So let's say, for instance, in this particular series of exercises, my default is I'm going to use this, this kind of filled greeny color. And if I left click on that greeny color, because there's nothing else here, I can say set default fill color. And it can be for that design only, or it should really read for this design only, which means this opened workspace, or for every new design, which means if I close the software, it will always fill with this neon green, not what I want. So I'm just going to say for that design only. So this is going to be my default fill. And furthermore, I'm going to say I don't want any outline around anything. I just want it to be the fill. So I'm going to come over here. Again, nothing's on the screen. And I'm going to left click in my, again, that white color means don't do it. Don't fill it. Don't outline it. And I'm going to say again for that design only. And so I'm going to say OK. And so if I come over to my circle tool and I left click and drag, you're going to see I get a beautiful neon filled green circle with filled paint, but no outline. And that's how you set your default. You can set it up for every single design coming forward, and you would say for all designs coming forward, or specifically for only this work session. So now that we have our little fill here, what I want to do is I want to create a couple of objects because I want to talk about crystal fill and the different ways that we can fill things with crystals. The paint is pretty self-explanatory, and the stitched outline we have covered. So I'm going to start with my circle. I'm going to also make let's just make a square. I'll say it's a rectangle. And let's also make a triangle. And I'm going to say there's going to be 3 sides to this. And as I click and drag, here is my triangle. And just to add a little spice to our lives here, we're going to go ahead and make this triangle a dark fill. That's way too dark. Let's see. How about this? A dark fill like this. And this little guy here, we're going to just turn him not into white, but just something along the lines of that will be fine. So we just have 3 different colors to look at. Once again, remember, if I wanted these non-jaggedy painted outlines, you know the trick. You're going to just outline that with a painted color. And again, it's a simple matter of selecting the object and maybe making it the same color. And you can see that we have something like that. So that's a filled and outlined object. I'm going to go ahead and take that outline back off. So it's back to where it had been. So I want to go ahead and I'm going to select this triangle. I'll select the triangle first. And I'm going to go for a fill. I'm going to say crystal fill. And I'm greeted with these objects as far as the number, the size of it. Of course, we've talked about this. I can change the color. We've talked about this. This is what I wanted to predominantly take a look at here, is this thing that says shape fill. This shape fill thing. It defaults, when you select the object, it defaults to what it thinks would be a good fit, no pun intended, for the object. And I would agree with this. I think this is a fine fill. It's filling in the object. It looks like, if I deselect it, it looks like a triangle done in crystals, which is lovely. What I'd like to do is I'm just going to show you a couple of the other options one of them would be a contour. If I click on contour, you can see that that also would be a nice fit for this object. This contour is kind of echoing inside the same shape. If I came over here and said rectangular, not so much. So in essence, it creates a rectangle out of crystals, and then it deletes that which does not fit into the shape. And you can kind of see where it gives you a look. And for what you might be doing, that might be a perfect look for that. But if I want a triangle, that's not a really good fit. If I go into line fit, this is kind of interesting. It'll take, it looks like it's an array of crystals going out to form that type of shape. And that's definitely something that I would certainly use. I think that's kind of cool. Let me just go into the reshape with this and see. I can reshape the object, but not really so much with the crystals themselves. So let me go back into, sometimes you'll see it looks like a little L, and you can change where things are placed. Let me see if I can probably find you one. Single line would just be something like that. That's kind of fun, but not what we want for today. Circular. So circular, that's kind of an interesting tool. And this is that reshape function I was kind of talking about a bit. With this, what this is going to be changing is these functions here, the start angle, the horizontal spacing, and the steps. This is kind of similar to the circle array tool. And so if I click on this, let me go into reshape. If I click on this, I can change the way, let me back out just a bit so you can see the effect. I can change the way these things are spaced. And again, if you look down here at these numbers, you're going to see what I do. It's just it's a way of visualizing the changes without just snapping in a bunch of numbers. By the way, when you see things like red X's or yellow X's, that's not a good thing. So the yellow X's, when you cut out the template, the little holes that are going to appear in the template are going to abut to one another. If you have these crystals with the red X, that means that they're actually overlapping, which is not a good thing. The other thing I would caution is you want to make sure that this overlapping crystals is selected, because if it's not selected, you're going to think that you're great with, and you are great with this design. It's just the design might not be good. You're great, but the design's not that good. So always come up when you're working with crystals and make sure that overlapping crystals is turned on so you can see the error of your ways before you waste supplies and making things out. So this is again how you can change various parameters here. But again, what I think was what they had done initially, which was the shape fit, and I kind of changed some of the parameters here. So let's go ahead and I'm going to do something fun here. Let me just make this a fill, and I'm going to turn it back into crystals. I just want to kind of reset things because I kind of liked how it was initially. Yeah. And let me just go here, reshape, and I'm just going to bring this a little bit more horizontal. So yeah, something along the lines of that. That's the winner. So now I'm going to choose the circle, and I'm going to say, let's do some crystal fill. And it also chose shape fit for this. I would probably like to see this in maybe the circular fill. That to me is a winner. If you notice, the crystals don't go all the way up to the edge here, and that's where your offset comes in handy. So if you come in here and say make the offset a positive number, it gets closer to the edge. So let's just try 2 millimeters because we can, and see if that changes. I'm going to try 3 millimeters. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm still under reshape here, so it's not letting the changes occur. So again, with the object selected, yes, and let's go to 4 millimeters. Let's try that. Okay, let's go to, okay, so like 4.1, a little too, well, actually, that might be nice. Let me go down to 4.0 again. 3.9. Let me go to 3. Let's see. Yeah, so you can kind of see how that kind of changed things there. So I kind of liked it, again, like, you know, even if you did say 4 and enter, that gives you a nice effect. The last object is the square. If I change this into crystal fill, again, goes to shape fit. That actually is a pretty good fit. Let's see what rectangular looks like. Rectangular looks like this. Notice it kind of cut off a little bit from the north and the south end of the object. If you go into contour, that kind of gives you a nice fit too, so it's kind of echoing around. So again, the big thing here is knowing that fill, how it fills depends really on which of these options you choose. And it looks like that shape fit is a good place to start. The other thing I do want to show you is if you came in here, let's say for instance, I'm gonna bring in a letter. I think that's going to be a better example. So I brought in the letter B, and again with my space bar, I'm going to go ahead and select the object. And if I hit the edit, you can see that this is the specific font that I brought in. Notice that I could bold this. If you look at the outline here, I could bold this, which would close off those openings, which I don't really want, so that's not a good option. And I can also make it on an italicized, but again, we'll just kind of leave it as such. It's currently at 60 millimeters. I'm just going to make this 75 just to increase the size a bit. The thing with lettering, if you're doing a lettering with fill, the larger the better. If you're just doing an outline stitch, you can certainly make things smaller, but I'll tell you that the fill, using a larger letter and using a smaller crystal. Think of the crystals kind of like pixels on a computer screen or a TV screen. The more pixels you have, the more definition you can bring about. So again, I have this object selected. I'm going to go ahead and go under crystal fill, and it defaulted to this single line. I'm going to go ahead and just make it a shape fit. That seems to work with a lot of objects, as we saw in that triangle, circle, and rectangle example. Now, I can see that's a B, and you can see that's a B, and part of that is because we have an outline there. And one thing you might want to consider is you could certainly, again, the outline is just because it's selected. If I deselect, you see how you don't have an outline anymore. Unless I hover over it, then you see the outline of the shape. You could certainly come in here with the object selected, and you could say make a, I don't know, like a stitched outline. You could say I want a stitched outline, and now there's a stitched outline. Notice that as soon as I put an outline there, either with a thread or a painted outline, it does change the dynamics with the crystals. And that's not a big thing. I can certainly add to it. But the benefit of this is now that I have thread down here, or it could be paint as well, I have a shape to work with when it's deselected. And that's important when I'm trying to do considerations as far as where I would put crystals with this. So again, I'm going to select the object, and let me just make sure that, like, I'm going to try contour. Now that gives me an interesting place to start as well. I might actually start with that. Let me also try, again, shape fit to see if that changes. Shape fit, yeah. Now, either that or the contour, I think, were good thoughts. I'm going to stick with the contour. So first things I want to point out is I can add crystals to this design, and I would simply come over here and grab a crystal and I would put it wherever I wanted. Like maybe I want to fill this area here out, and maybe a couple here just to kind of get that embellishment. I can come over here, put some crystals down. Now I'm going to purposely make a mistake here. You see how I got some yellow X's here, which means they're overlapping, but we're going to fix that. I can put a couple of crystals here, maybe a couple here, but you can see what I'm doing. I'm just kind of like painting in crystals just to better define that shape. And I'm going to put a couple here. And maybe I'm going to put some along here too, just to kind of define that opening a bit better. All right, so that looks like Crystal Heaven to me. So if you notice, when I select the object, I can't select individual crystals and move them. And even if I go into reshape, I can't do that. I don't think, let me just confirm. Yeah, I can't even change the position of the crystals I set down. You see how I've got reshape here, and it's not giving me that four-arrowed compass looking thing for me to move this crystal about. So what I need to do is I need to have this object selected. Oh, and I beg your pardon, if I select each individual crystal, let's see, will it allow me to do that? I think so. Yeah, if I select an individual, now these are the crystals I put in. I can certainly, yes, I can certainly move them this way, yes. But I can't move any of the ones that the computer had put down. So what I need to do is, with the object selected, I need to go down here to where it says separate into crystals. That's separate into crystals. So let me click on that, and you can see now all of these are selectable now, which is good. The other thing I will say is, if I select a crystal, you see how they're kind of grouped. I can move the group, but that wouldn't get me where I want to be. Let me just click undo. So the other thing I have to do is I have to right click and ungroup these crystals. Now if I select on an individual crystal, I have the individual crystal. This really helps when you zoom in, and I can start taking these crystals. Notice that when I select this one, if I move this over a bit, those yellow X's disappear. And this is where you do things for the love of doing them, because this is finicky, or fiddly, I guess. But you would come in here and you would, in essence, reshape all of these crystals so that they give you the effect that you're after. And again, if you see anything that is yellow X'd or red X'd, you really want to get in there and just kind of move them so that they're not colliding. But this is how you can go in, put your crystals down, and form your letters. Again, with a large enough letter, even without an outline, you'll be able to read it. But putting an outline down, either a painted or a stitched outline, certainly gives you, the eye at least, more of a reference. And if I came over and selected the outline, again, remember you could go in there and put in like a fun little decorative stitch around there. So that's how you can make crystal lettering. Just as with all embroidery software, we do have a slow redraw tool here in DesignWorks. And when I click on this tool, this allows me to review the stitch out of the object. And I really encourage you to do this with anything that you create in any of the software programs, because it'll let you see sometimes the things that are not in sequence correctly, or things that you might want to change before committing it to actual materials and time. This is set at 1,500 stitches or repeats per minute. I can certainly increase this or decrease this. I can move to the beginning of the object, to the end of the object. I can move it forward or in reverse, or quick forward, quick reverse. Moving the frame, well, let me just start this so you can kind of see. So this is showing you like the paint tool, and the it's creating this lovely design. I'm going to go ahead and speed this up a bit, and you can kind of see how it's going to be creating the objects. This is keeping the hoop stationary, but if you wanted it to view as if you were looking at the pen as it was drawing, that's where this move frame comes in handy. And to me, that kind of makes me, I don't know, dizzy. So that's not the way that I want to see the software work. So I'm just going to keep the frame still and not move the hoop around per se. But this is how you can start stitching. And this is like getting to the next color of it, stitching the next color. Stitching the next. I'm just kind of skipping forward by color. It's kind of interesting to see the angles that this paints at. And so in case you need to switch that up, this is a good double check. Now it's doing its outlines. And then that's the design complete. That was one of the built-in designs. It's pretty cool. So I want to show you the cut work tool and how you develop designs using that. And so first thing I'm going to do is, let me just grab this pentagon tool, and I'm just going to, it's a pentagon, it's a triangle, it depends on how many sides you have, of course. So I have this this pentagon here, and it is filled in, and there's no outline because that's how I had set my software up earlier. And what I want to do is, because there's a fill, notice that if I select it, I have my sequencing tray, and again, it's a painted fill, but there's no outline. Notice if I'm on my fill, I can turn this into an applique, and let me go ahead and do that. So this is now an applique, but it's but there's no cutting of this. You can tell the software that you are doing, say, a laser cut, which means if I was going to stitch this out, let me just get into the slow redraw part of this. What would happen is it's going to stitch a placement line, and then it's going to go ahead and put the blanket down. And that's because we told it it was a laser cut, which means the object had been pre-cut. So you could do that with your Cameo silhouette or with your Bernina cut work tool. But again, it just gives me a placement line. I put the fabric down, and it gives me my little decorative finish. And that's pretty much the design complete based on those parameters. If I said, instead of laser cut, that I'm doing this during the embroidery, and I go in and do, again, a slow redraw. I'm going to speed this up just a bit. Yeah. It's going to go ahead and do a placement line. I'm going to put the fabric down. It's going to do now a cutting line, and you use your duckbill scissors now to cut off the excess fabric. And then it's going to proceed to do its little blanket stitch. So, and you've seen applique before, so I won't belabor that point. If you notice with the types of stitching, it defaults to what they call the E stitch or a blanket stitch. but you could also do a zigzag, which would again be like your satin outline. So it turns it into a satin outline in essence. So that's applique in a nutshell using the DesignWorks software. Notice that I can't select outline because the outline stitch is what's going to give me my cut work file. And so let me go ahead. I'm just going to take this. I'm going to delete this. We're going to go ahead and grab another one of these little pentagons. And instead of a fill, I'm just going to go ahead and say no fill, but give me a outline of some sort. So there's my outline. And so now I have all of my outline tools. Again, if I went over to my sequencer, let me go select sequencer, you'll see no fill, but there's an outline. And I can have both. Don't get me wrong. You can have both, but I'm just doing one at a time. So here's my outline. I'm going to go ahead into cut work. And notice that when I do cut work, the software gives me this kind of meshed area, which they call like the working area, if you will, of the design. And even if it's not selected, I can tell you that this, by looking at it, it's not a fill, it's not a net fill. It is a placeholder that tells me that whatever's in that grid is removed. And if I go up to Tools and under Options and View, it's this part here, this little guy here that you need to pay attention to. Useful area always visible. It's selected that way in my software, but you may not want it that way. And if you notice, it's still a cut work file. How do I know it's a cut work? Well, for one thing, I can see it right here. This is my cut. It looks like a pair of scissors. But if I hover over the object, or touch, I should say, the border of it, you see that it once again shows me that that certainly is a cut file. For one, I don't particularly care for this behavior. I really want it to be visible all the time. So again, going up to Tools, going under Options, going under View, and saying Useful Area is always visible. For me, that's a better setting. So with the object selected, and cut work is the default here, this gives you the different options. The running stitch before, I generally always have down. I can't really think of a time that I wouldn't have it, but the running stitch before, I use that predominantly so that I can have a tack down of the fabric, especially if I'm cutting through multiple layers of fabric. Like I can cut through, like, say, upwards of 6 to 8 layers of fabric, depending on the fabric. If it's a cotton versus a denim, there's a difference in the density or the thickness of the fabric, of course. But you can cut through multiple layers of fabric and get many repeats of it, which again makes this tool, that's one of its advantages over some of these other systems like the Brothers Scan and Cut, the Cameo Silhouette, the Cricut circuit type of cutters, etc. It's generally one layer of material you're cutting. Generally speaking, I'm going to take my offset and I'm going to make it like about 1 millimeter. And as we look at this, when I hit enter, you're going to see here that there is now a stitched, this is what's going to happen first, the stitching is going to occur, and then this is where the cutting is going to take place right here, and it's going to be like a millimeter in between. If I'm going to see how this is going to stitch out, and let's do that, I'm going to go over to my stitch tool, and it's going to show that the tool is doing its stitch down to hold everything together. And then you see how there's like a number 1 here? This is the cut work tool. And so let me just kind of go through a little bit quicker here. And it's just cutting. There's like 4 different angles. It'll just, here's number 2. It's going to use whatever blade positions it needs to cut the various lines. Here's number 3. And you'll see as it's cutting, it's kind of like a little jaggedy line there. That's just showing you that the blade isn't necessarily right at that same angle, but it overlaps the cuts enough that you get a clean cut in that shape. So that's generally how you do cut work. And if I wanted to, say, have this shape, I would take the shape and copy it over. I would have two files. The first one would be my cut file, and the second one would be my applique file. So this would be my laser cut shape. I cut my pentagon out. I then start doing my embroidery side of things, which I showed you prior to it, and that's how you create. So cut work, as well as anything that's stitched, if you go File and Save As, it will give you a draw file, and that you would only use if this was, you wanted to do further editing. If you want to actually do something with this, what you would want to do is you'd go File and you would go Export. And when you're going to export, if you're doing this on a Bernina machine, which is the only option you have, you click on Bernina, and this gives you the 4 different methods of stitching this out. It depends really on the machine you have. Like, majority of us will be using this. This is for older machines that had a serial port, like the Aurora, I believe. This is for a Bernette Deco machine. And so that's how you would export a design to actually put onto your machine to stitch out. Do appreciate that. Let me just take this design, and I'm going to get rid of the outline, and I'm going to put in a fill. So now I've got a fill, and I'm going to turn this fill magically into crystals. So now this is a crystal fill. That is all this is. There's no stitching. There's no painting to it. Notice if I go to File and if I go to Export, do you see how Bernina is grayed out? It's because this is not a painted or cut file. I can certainly go Crystals to Machine, and that'll give me this wizard, if you will, where I can choose my template. I can print a preview of this, or I can send the files straight out to the machine to cut the Templar material and what have you. I would take note of these measurements because when I'm cutting the template material, some manufacturers call it a flox, F-L-A-X, flax material. It's a kind of a tufted material that you make these holes in to put the crystals in. I like to have these measurements, and I like to cut it a little bit larger because I don't want to waste the backing board or the template material. So take note of that reading. I'm not going to click here because this would just send it over to the USB stick to use in the machine. Notice also that I have this export to Bernina, and that is grayed out, and that is because this is only if you have like a paint or a stitched file. Again, if you want to do crystals, it's export crystals to machine. If this was, let me just turn this back into something that's painted. Let's see. Better here. Let's see. I'm going to turn this into a fill. Notice how now this is active. It was grayed out before, but now it's active. And so that's how I would export a painted file to that. So I hope that this has been of help. There's a lot of things to do, even in a basic overview. I didn't talk in depth about a lot of these things. This is what you'll get with our sessions together. But I think having a basic overview of how this software works is extremely important so that you know where these tools are and you can use them accordingly. So do by all means email me with any questions at shannon@stevesewingback.com, and you know I'm pretty quick at answering you. Take care.